So welcome everybody to our lecture. We first have to apologize. We really had problems with the Zoom meeting. It was not possible to open it, but we are happy that our guest lecturer, Professor Dr. Henny Piezonka, agreed to give the talk. So that at least you can join it online. But first of all, I would like to introduce to you Henny Piezonka. She studied prehistory, classical archaeology and art history in Berlin and in Glasgow. Her master thesis, so Magister, was dedicated to bronze and Iron Age research in the former Neumark, and this master thesis was awarded with two prizes. One of the prize of the Humboldt University, and the other prize was the Urcho Prize of the Berlin Society for Anthropology, Ethnology, and Prehistory. Her PhD thesis, Henny Piezonka, did on the spread of pottery from Stone Age hunter-gatherers between the Urals and the Baltics. She also this thesis was awarded after the defense in 2010 by the Dr. Walter Liebehans Prize. Between 2004 and 2016, Henny Piezonka worked in various positions and research projects at the universities of Bonn and Greifswald and the German Archaeological Institute. She carried out field research in various regions of Europe, North and Inner Asia, focusing mainly on hunter-gatherers and pastoral nomadic societies. In 2015, she began her own research project on the site of Yoksa in northwest Russia. Between 2016 and 2023, she was junior professor of anthropological archaeology and ethnoarchaeology at the Kiel University. Within the excellence cluster Roots at Kiel, she worked as a PI on dynamics of social inequalities and the links between animal and plant domestication on the one hand and nutrition and disease on the other. She is also PI of the CRC 1266 Scales of Transformation, Human Environment Interaction in Prehistoric and Archaic Societies at Kiel. In 2023, she moved to the Freie Universität Berlin, where she holds professorship and is the director of the Institute for Prehistory. Henny Piezonka's research focuses on hunter-gatherers and pastoral communities and early farming societies, with a regional focus on the Eurasian forest zone and the Arctic. In a broad time frame from the end of the Ice Age to the present, she investigates long-term social, cultural, and economic dynamics in connection with mobility and sedentary lifestyles in steppe, forest, and tundra environments. It would really go beyond the time frame if I were to list the numerous publications by Henny Piezonka. I already in the beginning mentioned her two monographs. We are very pleased that Henny Piezonka has accepted our invitation to give a lecture at AWA and are now handing over the floor to her. So.
Thank you, Elke, and for this really kind introduction, and also Agathe for inviting me to give a talk in this really interesting lecture series. Yeah, sorry that we had some technical problems, but now we record the session and everybody can look at it at their own time. So that's also maybe a nice thing. And if there's any questions, you can either write to me or maybe we can talk about it at one of the other lectures. So let's see how we can deal with that. So the talk I want to give today is entitled Hunter-Gatherer Worlds of Post-Glacial Eastern Europe, Relations and Innovations between Black Sea, Baltic and Urals. And as you can see from the title, I will sort of take into view the area north of the Pontic region and the Balkans in order to sort of position the developments in this region in a wider framework. So my talk will start with a little introduction on the hunter-gatherer spectrum, and then I would like to take into view several of those trajectories, including technological innovation, economic intensification, and socio-political diversification, before I want to outline some future directions of research. So, as you all know, and as maybe has not been the center of the AVA lecture series on the Pontic and Northern Pontic and Balkan topic so far, the hunter-gatherer spectrum, of course, is a very important part of the life worlds of humanity from deep time, the emergence of humanity periods up until today, when hunter-gatherer life worlds are persisting in several regions of the world. And maybe to sort of set the ground for investigating and regarding the hunter-gatherer life worlds in our topic here, it's important to bear in mind that it's an artificial classification, really, which makes us forge this category of hunter-gatherers. It's really based in human ecology and concerns a classification based on the mode of subsistence. So hunter-gatherers in this point of view are just one category alongside with fishers, sedentary farmers or horticulturalists, herding nomads, and then also the categories of city-dwelling societies and so on. So this is something we need to bear in mind. It's an artificial categorization, and the lines between different human communities and modes of being in the world could also be drawn completely differently. So it's a scientific category which is in partly questionable, but this will not be the topic today. But we will actually look at hunter-gatherers based on this classification, so when we stick with this classification, we can then find a lot of archaeological literature, of course, and anthropological literature regarding hunter-gatherers in the past and the present. So you see here a map in an archaeology handbook by Colin Renfrew and Peter Barn, which shows how hunter-gatherer populations have been the only type of existence in the world globally on a global scale prior to the invention of farming. This is exemplified by the map on the top. And then they also show on this lower map that this mode of subsistence, so this category of being in the world, has been diminished over the millennia of human history, of recent human history. So there are now only a very few recent societies which still based their subsistence and existence really largely on the acquisition of food by hunting and gathering. And also in these schemes of classifying hunter-gatherers within the spectrum of modes of subsistence, it's also important to bear in mind that these classifications are also often grounded in evolutionist conceptions of the scientific system. And so for a long time, there has been like a progressivist idea of the development of human societies, which leads from savagery, which is equated then with hunting and gathering lifestyles, via the Neolithic, so the introduction of farming, of food production, leading towards civilization, then urban civilizations, and ultimately our current modern capitalist society. And as you can imagine, this is of course highly problematic, also in order to understand diversity in the human spectrum. And here I just show two pictures of recent hunter-gatherers of current societies which lead hunting and gathering lifeways and also promote their persistence. For example, the San communities of Namibia, or the other picture shows our Selkup partners who are hunters and fishers in the taiga of Western Siberia. So it's nothing gone and it's nothing outdated, but it's part of the modern world. So this is like the view I would like to promote when we deal with hunting and gathering societies, emphasizing the variability and broad spectrum of adaptations and lifeways which are connected to this hunting and gathering category. Here you see an illustration by Peter Hommel, who tried to illustrate this aspect by emphasizing these binary categories. So there's non-territorial and territorial hunter-gatherers, mobile and sedentary hunter-gatherers, egalitarian and ranked societies of hunters and gatherers, foragers, collectors, and so on and so on. So it's a really broad spectrum, and between these binary poles, which I just mentioned, of course, there's also intermediate versions, possibilities, and variants. So hunter-gatherer research can inform on not only on any simple and long gone periods of human development, but in fact it can inform us on a much broader spectrum of really of history and what it means to be human in the world. For example, human nature systems, facets of societal complexity, diverse sociocultural dynamics, alternatives in human behavior, which we might not actually have so much in mind, coming from our own restricted field of experience in city-dwelling societies mainly, and altogether on different possibilities of the human condition. And in my talk today, I want to highlight some aspects concerning hunting and gathering societies of this region in question, which is mentioned in the title of my work. So this very famous map showing the expansion of farming into Europe by Detlef Kronenborn and Barbara Horace shows a big empty area north of that expansion, northeast of that expansion, which also happens to be northeast of what is the topic of this year's AVA lecture series, which regards the Northern Pontic region and the Balkan region. And so what we want to look at here is actually the region north of that. So the area between the Urals mountains in the east and the Baltic Sea in the west, the Barents Sea in the north, the tundra region, and the Northern Pontic region in the south. So we want to take a look mainly at the forest zone. At this map you see the taiga, the boreal forest, and I will also deal a little bit with the steppe zone, the forest steppe zone, adjacent to this forest zone to the south. So this is like the area we want to take a look at here, and the time frame is mainly focused on the early Holocene period to mid-Holocene. And you see here at the, is my mouse visible? Can you see my mouse? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yes, indeed.
Cool. Okay. So that's nice. So yes, and so what we want to look at mainly is this period between, let's say, the already a little bit developed Mesolithic up until the onset of the Neolithic period in many parts of this area regarded. And what we deal with here mainly, as you will see during the talk, is hunter-gatherer societies which use pottery already. And we will see some sites as exemplary case studies, but also quite a lot of overviews about several different questions. Maybe one thing to bear in mind also when dealing with this time frame and this area is, just on a brief notice here, that when we speak of the Neolithic, so following the Mesolithic period, there are two different concepts prevalent in the area in question. The Western Neolithization concept, which sees the invention and dispersal of agriculture and animal husbandry, so producing economy, as the main criterion to define the Neolithic. So this is exactly what Kronenborn and Horace had illustrated on their map. And the Eastern Neolithic concept, which is very different because it regards pottery as the main defining criterion, irrespective of the economic basis, And that means that in this area east of that Neolithization strand, which is shown on the Kronenborn map, actually is regarding mainly hunter-gatherers with pottery, as we will see in more detail later on. And this is a main difference which we have to bear in mind when looking at these societies and when trying to understand the literature on them. So you see these two concepts are prevalent in different parts of Eurasia. So the Western concept is mainly the main concept in the dominant concept in most of Europe. And then the Eastern concept is prevailing in mainly the parts of the former Soviet Union and nowadays Russia and some adjacent countries. And there is also an intermediate phase region with like interesting dynamics of finding compromise labels and so on. I will maybe talk about it a little bit later on. So the Neolithic and this concept plays a bit of a role here in understanding the hunter-gatherer societies in this region. And we want to look at sort of this Neolithic package in a way from a hunter-gatherer point of view, maybe, because this Neolithic package, which is the backbone of the Neolithic concept of the Western categorization, lists several aspects concerning technology, for example, pottery, economy, in this case it would be this animal husbandry concept, and plant cultivation, ideological aspects, for example, monumentality, but also the aspects of the socio-political sphere, so the emergence of social inequalities often mentioned in this respect as part of the so-called Neolithic package. And if we look from a hunter-gatherer point of view, we see that many of those aspects are also in a way playing a role in dynamic developments in hunter-gatherer societies and innovations connected to them. And this is like the outlook we want to take here, meaning that maybe talking here with Peter Jordan and his colleagues, when taking the view from a hunter-gatherer perspective on the Neolithization, we see that it was them who were the great innovators and the driving force in some of the most important cultural transformations to affect global humanity. So especially these Neolithic innovations, we have to bear in mind, have been actually invented by hunter-gatherers. So that's the sort of outset we will take now to look at some aspects in more detail. So let's take a look at technological innovation at first. And so one very influential innovation, which already started in the Paleolithic, but which affected also these societies, which we want to look in more detail at here, at the region as well, is the spread of regular blade technology. Again, a map by Detlef Kronenborn, who is really making very nice maps on very different aspects with a nice supervision view. So this microblade technology, as we can also call it, seems to have its origin in glacial Eastern Asia, 30,000, 20,000 years ago, maybe. We see this sort of area, Mongolia and Baikalia, where this new technology, which is connected to the pressure technique, takes its outset and then spreads both to the northeast into Alaska with these wedge-shaped cores, which are very typical, but also to the west, as you can see here, through Eurasia, through northern Eurasia, reaching Europe in different time frames from the east to the west, where it then arrives in early and middle Mesolithic societies here, traced in different sites in central Russia, and then extending even further west, where it reaches southern Scandinavia and northern Central Europe in the late Mesolithic period, where we have almost the same core shape, as you can see if you compare the Alaskan example and this South Scandinavian example, which are just labeled with different names in, as I said, in the East, in Eastern Asia and they would be called wedge-shaped cores, whereas in the other, completely other side of Eurasia, they are called handle cores, but actually the technology is exactly the same. So here we seem to have an innovation which spread across Northern Eurasia, across over like many millennia and many thousand kilometers, and it's one of the innovations which have shaped technologies on the continent very substantially. And another innovation by hunter-gatherers, which I want to take into view here, is pottery. And again, I just noticed I show another map by Detlef Kronenborn, again, very nicely prepared, illustrating this view on the innovation of pottery from a European perspective, where we have these well-known Neolithic strands, the Danubian Neolithization strand, of which the Linear Band Pottery is part of, and then the Occidental one with the Impresso and Cardial ceramic, which then also reaches along the Mediterranean coast, Western Europe then. But then Kronenborn identified a third strand. He calls it Hyperborean. I don't know if I would follow him with this label, but still he identifies this northeastern strand, which for a long time was not really clear how it has to be, like how it relates to these other strands known and where its origins lie. And so if we take a bit of a closer look here, we see that this hunter-gatherer pottery, because this eastern strand is hunter-gatherer pottery, actually has developed completely independent of any agricultural Neolithic European developments, but already at the end of the 7th millennium between the Urals and the Baltic, we see in the northern Caspian and the northern Pontic region first emergence of pottery vessel use and innovation among the local hunter-gatherer societies. Pointed-based and flat-based pottery is known here in the Karachak formation, for example, and the Yelshan culture at the Volga region. And then these hunter-gatherer pottery types spread along the rivers to the north and west into the forest zone, where they then form new typologies, mainly pointed-based pottery. We have in the forest zone here, for example, the situation around 5,500 calibrated BC, which is then parallel to these Neolithic developments of the expansion of the Danubian Neolithic with the linear band pottery, for example, established in the west. And yet another time slice, 5,000 Cal BC, when this hunter-gatherer pottery has been dominating most of the forest zone and even reaching into the tundra zone in the north. So what we see is a really vivid mosaic of hunter-gatherer societies with pottery in this period. And new research in the frames of an ERC Advanced Grant led by Carl Heron from the British Museum and colleagues over the last years between 2016 and 2021 has been able to really place these developments on a completely new factual basis based on big data analysis of these pottery complexes from the forest zone, mainly through the work also of the groundwork of Ekaterina Dalbunova of the State Hermitage Museum and the British Museum, and other colleagues who, for example, conducted modeling based on these big data analysis. And with that analysis, we were able to show how and to model actually how the spread of pottery knowledge in these hunter-gatherer societies between the Urals and the Baltic took place. And we were able to pinpoint the early emergence here in the northern Caspian region at the end of the 7th millennium calibrated BC. Even earlier pottery then existed in Siberia. I will just show you a map in a minute. And then it quite quickly in the second half of the 6th millennium calibrated BC, it spread through the forest zone to the north, where it became established in a very quick wave. And this is now all backed up with very many new C14 data and model data and reservoir correction and so on. So we really have a very concrete and detailed picture now of these hunting and gathering societies of the forest zone and their use of pottery. And this work feeds into a bigger picture and a bigger trend, which has been modeled in a pioneering work a couple of years ago, well, it's actually almost 10 years ago now, by Peter Jordan and his team, who modeled the then existing radiocarbon dates of early pottery complexes. And we have to see now, of course, this area can be looked at in much more detail now, and there's a lot of errors which could be taken out of the picture now. For example, this late spot here is an artifact which must be filled in with a very early spot here. But anyway, the big trend actually shows that we have across Eurasia and Northern Africa, so the old world really, we have two poles of early pottery emergence, one of them being situated here in Eastern Asia, starting in the late glacial period, with the emergence of pottery vessel economies. And on the other hand, we have an almost equally old pole here in North Saharan Africa, where pottery, in fact, in Sahara Africa, where pottery also emerges as early as the 10th millennium BC, just after the end of the glacial period. So that's what this modeling shows. And we see two strands spreading then from Eastern Asia into the west and from Northern Africa into the east. And these two strands met along a line, along a borderline, so to say, which can also be modeled, and depending on the criteria in the model, the line shifts a little bit, but actually it's very fixed in this area which we are situated in. Actually, Berlin is situated here, and the diversity of the model only affects the southern part here in the South Asian area. So we seem to have two strands of pottery at least meeting at this line. One of them mainly involving hunter-gatherer pottery, here shown with yellow dots, and then the African strand really starts with hunter-gatherer pottery, and then it develops into this farming pottery and the Neolithic of the Levant, and then the Neolithic expansion with pottery into Europe is related to this Western strand, which maybe ultimately has to be traced back to African origins, which is something which nobody really has taken into account yet, and which I think is a very interesting new perspective on understanding these developments on a bigger scale. And if we look globally at the hunter-gatherer pottery, we see again this East Asian origin of it, the spreading through Eurasia into this area, which we look at here in more detail now. And also it seems to be related to hunter-gatherer pottery in much later hunter-gatherer pottery in North America, which also has the same type of shapes. It's a sort of bag-shaped form with pointed bases in the forest zone here in North America. That's another interesting aspect which needs more work, because we to this day don't know whether this North American hunter-gatherer pottery is ultimately related to North-Eurasian prehistoric pottery types and has been spread there over the across the Bering Strait into North America, or whether we have a new a sort of separate invention of the same solution for the use in the forest zone, which might have led to this shape, which might have been the best suited for such environments. I don't know. So we don't know that, and this is something to be investigated in more detail in the future. Okay, let's look now into another aspect of the Neolithic package, or like the hunter-gatherer diversity package, the economic intensification. And the region I want to look at in my talk is mainly concerning the forest zone north of the Northern Pontic region. And we have to bear in mind that the forest zone, these boreal forests, which make up the taiga forests, both in Europe and also then further east, might actually seem to us like huge forested areas with little population and quite sort of undiverse ecologies, but from a hunter-gatherer point of view, it is an extremely rich ecosystem, because these areas provide fish and abundant water and forest fowl, also large mammals, and an important aspect is, especially from this hunter-gatherer point of view, that these resources have extremely predictable seasonal abundances, which can be which can even be harvested, we might call it, with these within the seasonal cycle. And this is important because this influences the category of the so-called affluent hunter-gatherers. Just like with the maybe what we imagine with the as the advantage of food production through farming and animal husbandry, which then is a means to ensure food year round. These affluent hunter-gatherers have developed or can develop quite similar sort of food security systems, which are based on research management and storage. Because storage economies, just like with the farming economy, and which is farming economies are mainly based on storage, it influences the settlement patterns, the mobility patterns, and the possibility to settle down. It also then influences population densities, and with that also the emergence of socio-economic inequalities. And so from a hunter-gatherer point of view, this year-round food security and storable, the storage possibilities for foodstuffs are related to the abundance of resources, the efficiency of food acquisition, the seasonality of resources, as mentioned before, and food storage techniques. And with these four aspects, hunter-gatherers are able to store food and to ensure year-round abundance of food. Of course, with the same problems which are also encountered by farming societies, by early farming societies, that of course bad harvests or like bad years in this case can of course lead then to food shortages and endanger the populations and lead to starvation. But let's look in some of those aspects in a bit more detail. Fishing in these hunter-gatherer societies or hunter-gatherer fisher societies, the food acquisition societies plays a huge role, especially in the forest zone. Natural storage is provided, for example, by the migratory fish, by winter refugia, which then are also affected by oxygen shortages, and we know from ethnographic evidence that the local hunting and gathering communities really know, of course, their environment very well, and they know about the winter refugia where the fish would accumulate, and then they can use these refugia for fishing, and then they can also ensure the food security through the preservation, through drying, smoking, fermenting, or freezing of the fish, of the harvested fish, so to say. And one important aspect also concerns the transformation of the fish and other aquatic resources into high energy, well storable and well transportable products, for example, fish meal, which can be easily stored and transported in bags, or fish oil, which once you have the technology to produce it, you can also store it easily and transport it. So it's a really important commodity. But also active resource management plays a role in these fishing economies. For example, temporary keeping of fish in artificial ponds. In America, we also have evidence for the keeping of mollusks in such artificial environments. And also, as you see here at the pictures, the harvesting, I want to call it harvesting because it really is harvesting, facilities and technologies play a big role. And here you see a fish fence of the Khanty community in Western Siberia and the huge fish traps in which the masses of fish collect, which then can be taken out of the water and processed as described. And an almost identical construction from the Coast Salish in British Columbia, a fish fence for salmon in the salmon runs, again enabling the people to really harvest big amounts of this fish every year at certain known times of the year. So this is the technologies which then enable this very efficient use of that resource. And in the archaeological record of the region in question here, we have abundant evidence for prehistoric systems doing exactly that. And one example is the site Vyoksa in North-West Russia, which Elke already mentioned in her introduction because it was a DFG-funded project running for several years together with Russian colleagues from Vologda, led by Nadezhda Nedomolkina, my colleague from Vologda. And we investigated this Vyoksa site, which is a multi-period site starting in the 6th millennium BC and running actually into the medieval period, but with very interesting Stone Age hunter-fisher find complexes. And here I will show you the later one. We have also the early one, but the late Stone Age complex around at the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC provides thousands of posts at the riverbank of this river Vologda at the Vyoksa site. And at first we thought this might be pile dwellings, but now we know it's not pile dwellings, but it's actually fishing constructions. It's exactly those fish fences which are combined with fish traps made from these wooden laths, which we excavated, which are extremely well preserved in this waterlogged riverbank. And we were able to show that exactly such systems, as I showed you from the ethnographic records earlier on, have been erected here by the local hunter fishers over several, in this case, several centuries, fishing with these traps at the fences in order to provide this aquatic resource. And another resource which, in my opinion, has been neglected too much in archaeological approaches to understanding hunter-gatherer, prehistoric hunter-gatherer lifeways is the birds, the fowling as another way to secure abundant food from the forest resources. It's another instance of natural storage, we might say, because the birds also have these predictable seasonal abundances, both the migratory water birds, but also the forest fowl. And again, ethnographic records show, and our indigenous partners from Western Siberia also let us know from their expertise that these birds can be also harvested in masses in these different seasonal settings. Here we see an example from the Selkup community hunting forest fowl, wood grouse, with these wooden traps in autumn and being able to, in 1 week, get more than 50 of them. And then these birds can be frozen and dried, so they can also be stored, and they're really caught in masses. You see another Selkup example here where ducks which have been shot are boiled in a kettle as a nice food resource. And we also know from the ethnographic records, both from North America and from North-Eurasia, that this bird hunting can also involve landscape shaping, in order, for example, by making artificial corridors, by cutting down vegetation to guide flying ducks, which then can be caught, for example, with nets, or to attract the forest fowl to the traps with sand and pebbles, as you can see here in the left-hand side picture. So that's not it's not a coincidence that the soil is sandy, but the birds, they like to eat little stones in order to facilitate their how to call it, digestion. And that's why these sandy, gravelly spots are attractive for them. They fly to them or walk to them and then eat the stones. And so this is what the traps make use of, because they are located at these sandy spots, or sand is spread there specifically to attract the birds. So it's like really landscape shaping taking place here, because the sand is sometimes taken from pits actually. And we even find evidence, if we know what to look for, evidence for the hunting of birds or the use of birds as a resource like this in the archaeological record. Here we have from a Western Siberian early Iron Age south pit, this peculiar accumulation of little stones in a really dense concentration. And knowing all this background information, we can say this is the, I don't know how you call it actually in English, this is what this collection of little stones in the gut, not in the gut, but in the throat of a forest bird, and as it looks in the archaeological record. So when we look know what to look for, we can actually see this evidence in the houses, if we're lucky. So all I want to say is an important resource which archaeologists seem to maybe not value enough as an important source enabling these hunter-gatherer lifeways in the forest zone. And again, this induced project, which I already mentioned, has been able to pinpoint or to provide more information and insights into the role of pottery in these economies by employing, again, big data biomolecular research on the pottery from these many sites which we have investigated in this project. And in this case, Blandine Courel and colleagues were able to publish data on that, showing how the pottery use in the society varies according to environmental setting and regional background. Because what we can show is that aquatic resources are mainly processed in the pots in the northern part of the region in question, whereas porcine fats are actually mainly found in the pots in the southern region, which is then the area which is also of interest, especially for this lecture series, concentrating on Northern Pontic questions. And ruminant fats are sort of more evenly spread in the north and the south. And another study also looking at lipid residue analysis from the pottery in the same project was able to show the same with different data. So again, we could pinpoint that the aquatic resources shown in blue here, aquatic lipids are concentrating in the northern parts, and plant resources play a big role here in the southern part of the forest zone and the forest steppe, whereas the ruminant fats are mainly in the western parts of the area in question and in the south, of especially important for the use in the pottery. So the aquatic, what's important is aquatic resources have this sort of northern trend really when used in pottery. And again, in connection with the more recent information, with the ethnographic and ethnohistoric information we know both from North-Eurasia and also from North America, where the situation is really super similar concerning that, we can just show now that even the Stone Age hunter-gatherer pottery is that the main use really was as cooking pots, because both in Eurasia and in North America, at the moment when the settler colonialists came in with their metal cauldrons, so in Eurasia, it is in North Eurasia, it is actually the steppe cauldrons coming in the first millennium maybe, Cal AD, and then the actual metal cauldrons in the second millennium, Cal AD, and in North America, you know, of course, the settler colonialism with the Russian expansion in this case, and in North America, it's the European settler colonialism, which also brought the cauldrons. And once in both settings in the forest, these cauldrons appear, pottery gets out of use. So the metal cauldrons, which are even better transportable because they don't break as easily as the pottery, completely replace pottery use in both areas. So we can, from that evidence alone, extrapolate the function of the hunter-gatherer pottery among the local hunting and gathering societies of prehistoric forest zone. And maybe some slides on another aspect, the socio-political diversification in these hunter-gatherer societies. Maybe we take a look at some settlement dynamics briefly in the northern part of this region, where sort of the expansion of the farming economy never really got to the most northerly areas. That's just because farming isn't really possible in these cold continental climates. And what we see when we look at the settlement dynamics between Urals and the Baltic from the Mesolithic to the end of the Stone Age, in this case, we see that there is like winter settlements, which even already in the Neolithic, Mesolithic period, consist of pit house constructions. So they are sunken floor houses which keep the heat of the fireplace, the central fireplace, very well. So it's a very convenient type of settlement for the cold winters. And we know it already from the Mesolithic settlements. And this winter type of houses persists through the ages. And we can also imagine that summer houses have been lighter constructions in these mobile communities of the type of tipi like tents, and they also persist into the ethnographic period. And these sunken floor winter houses are a very convenient solution for these regions, and they also persist into the Neolithic period, with the difference that in the Neolithic population levels have grown and the settlements are also bigger. So we don't have single houses anymore, but these connected little underground settlements in a way, like hobbit houses, we can imagine them in this region. So, but what we don't have is any evidence of fortifications. And I say this because, interestingly, on the other side of the Urals mountains, this is completely different, because here, interestingly coinciding with the climatic event, the so-called 8.2 event, 8,200 years ago, so 6,200 years BC, we have this climatic event, a cooling event, a little oscillation in our climatic curve, and it coincides in Western Siberia with a period of accelerated innovation, which we don't fully understand yet. It's the time when pottery comes in, when pit houses intensify, when a really strange type of ritual mounds appear, and most interestingly, maybe when this type of settlements all of a sudden becomes noticeable. They are fortified settlements, promontory forts, but also circular fortified settlements appearing around 6,000 Cal BC in this northern forest zone of this remote, seemingly remote region of Eurasia. We don't completely understand it, but we see, fortification trend, and also hierarchization of the settlement of the houses themselves. So we see often in these settlements, one bigger house and several smaller houses, like here again at the site of Mnyorgan, which is a bit younger, a larger house at the tip of the promontory, and then these smaller houses. So maybe even trends towards sort of a stratification of the society. And our research on one of those sites, on Amnya, actually was rated quite highly, or like was noticed quite highly as a sensational find, which I must say I agree, because it looks as if it's one of the oldest fortified settlements in the world. And of course, it's especially sensational since it is hunter-gatherer settlements, which seem to be the oldest fortified sites in the world. This in Western Siberia is not only this early instance of fortified sites in these hunter-gatherer societies of the forest zone, but it's actually the start of a continuous tradition of fortified settlements throughout the time. Another peak of that we see, for example, in the Iron Age and even the Middle Ages. We have these fortified sites in Western Siberia. This is a phenomenon which is not very well studied and which is currently the topic of the PhD of Tanja Schreiber here at she works at FU University now, Freie University, but conducts the end of her dissertation with Kiel University. So I'm really curious what Tanja will find out about the dynamics and reasons for this peculiar phenomenon in Siberia. And what I find most interesting actually is why we see this really complex hierarchical stratification of the settlement system, including fortification, which is a marker for conflict in Western Siberia, whereas at the other side of the Urals mountains, between the Urals and the Baltic Sea, we don't see any of it. The earliest fortresses in this region among the hunter-gatherers, in this region where this hunter-gatherer societies persisted, is Iron Age, and there it comes in actually with Iron Age farming societies. So we don't understand what is the difference, because the natural, environmental and ecological background is very similar. So that's something which currently we don't know and which we hopefully will find out in the future. One thing is seemingly connected to the to these hunter-gatherer fortifications, if we look at a more global scale, seems to be the connection to sites which are enabling mass harvesting of aquatic resources. This is also the case not only in this early, probably the case in this early instance in Western Siberia, which I just showed you, but we see it at much later hunter-gatherer fortifications in North America, as well as in Kamchatka and the Eurasian Far East, where in both cases, these fortification building events are apparently associated to such sites which are well suited for mass harvesting of aquatic resources. So that's one starting point maybe to better understand this phenomenon, and this is where the research need to concentrate on in the next years. Resources and emerging territoriality is not only like interconnections between resources and emerging territoriality is not only seen in the settlement patterns and the peculiar phenomenon of the hunter-gatherer fortresses, but also in the phenomenon of the emergence of formal burial grounds among hunter-gatherer societies around 6,200 and 6,000 BC. This is a European phenomenon, starting at the western coast at the Atlantic seaboard, also noticeable in northern Germany. You see the site of Großfredenwalde as one example, and also in Eastern Europe, another famous cemetery is Linear Band, which emerges also exactly at that time. And the question is whether this appearance of these formal burial grounds at exactly that time might be also connected to this climatic event of the 8.2 oscillation. And just a few slides on that. Linear Band cemetery, Mesolithic cemetery in the Lake Onega, pre-ceramic hunter-gatherer cemetery in this case, which has been which has provided more than 140 graves which are investigated there, really very rich hunter-gatherer graves. And recent study has been able to pinpoint the chronological setting of the cemetery to a really short period, centering interestingly, really super interestingly, exactly at the 8.2 event, which you can see here. And Schulting and his colleagues, they have the hypothesis that indeed this has to do with a territorial claim to an area in a difficult time when the lakes of the surrounding region were affected by the climatic event, leading to these oxygen problems with the fish populations, and then maybe putting stress on the human populations, who then might have needed to focus on certain sites and being putting more claim to the land, maybe exemplified by such cemeteries like Alineostrof. And one more example from northern Germany is another formal cemetery which has just been identified as such over the last years in a project led by Thomas Terberger and colleagues at Großfredenwalde, who also were able to show that the 11 individuals excavated here are centering exactly around that time, around 6,200 to 6,000 and 5,900 Calvici, with one outlier which is younger, shown here. So it seems to be also a pattern which then needs to be investigated more, especially concerning the possible relation to this climatic event. But we need to, of course, be careful with climatic determinism and try to understand this hunter-gatherer life world and its developments, including these territorialization trends which we see in a broader context. Similar relations we can actually also see in the region, which is the actual center of attention here in this our lecture series in the Northern Pontic region, where we have exactly at that time, at the end of the 7th millennium, the emergence of the so-called Mariupol type burial fields of hunter-gatherer societies at the nearby rapids. And if we look at Lepensky Weir, it's another site where aquatic resources are harvestable in big amounts, which also led to very complex hunter-gatherer life worlds and social systems, which involve also territorial aspects like burial grounds. So it's an interesting phenomenon if we even look at a broader geographical range, and we need to study this in more detail and try to understand it maybe also at a super-regional trend, which needs to be understood better. So maybe at the end of my talk, I would like to highlight a few perspectives for future research. It's not exhaustive at all. It's just two aspects I would like to highlight here now. This is the first aspect concerns the question how these hunter-gatherer societies were then interacting with the emerging farming societies, or like the incoming farmers, as it may be, as it is the case, especially with the Danubian Neolithization expansion. It's very interesting looking at the border zones at the edge of the farming expansion, because we see the emergence of so-called parallel societies in several of these areas. Großfredenwalde was already mentioned with this later burial, which is genetically and isotopically a hunter-gatherer, and also concerning the burial custom. But he is a person who must have seen the first linear band pottery people in the vicinity, who have been settling only 10 kilometers away from him and from where he's buried. And other sites like the burial site of Ostorp or Tangermünde, they are even later and seem to represent hunter-gatherer enclaves in an already in a landscape already dominated and used by farming societies, by these incoming farming societies. This persistence of the parallel economies for several hundred and even thousands years has also been shown through isotopic analysis of, here you see, of a sample from northern Germany, where we can see that while up until the 5th millennium, the parallel economic strategies were persisting, with the farmers here eating terrestrial resources, so they would eat well, both the grain from the arable fields, but also terrestrial animals like sheep and goat and cows, whereas these hunter-gatherers would mainly in this area have an aquatic diet, shown here in the isotopes. And we see then, if we look in the later period, that in this northern Neolithic, so this region of the parallel societies on the northern fringe of the expansion of the farming, these economies persisted, and aquatic resource use really persisted for a long time, and only became streamlined into a fully farming economy in the 3rd millennium, really, really late. The same can be, of course, traced with these really very powerful new genetic approaches here, a map by Cosimo Post and colleagues published in a really big, huge study in Nature, which also involved, for example, the genomes from Großfredenwalde, showing the interaction and the persistence of the interaction between Eastern and Western hunter-gatherers, but also the persistence of these hunter-gatherer genomes, populations, even when the farmers were already there for a while. They did not mix, at least in this northern region. So that's also something where new and more detailed information can be expected from new research here. And of course, the eastern fringe of the linear band pottery also provides very interesting insights in the border zones between farming and hunting and gathering societies. So really coming now into the area which is the topic of the lecture series, the Northern Pontic region. It's super interesting to look here at the eastern fringe of the band pottery, how these other cultures, the underlying Mesolithic communities, but then also the pottery producing hunter-gatherers of the Bug-Dnestr tradition are interacting. What is the sequence here? Do they sort of also form such parallel existences, or are they even interrelated? That's something for the future to be studied. Here you see this band ceramic expansion, and then the region where the Bug-Dnestr hunter-gatherers would come in. And we just recently started a nice dialogue with colleagues in Moldova who are very interested in further investigating these questions also in this region of intersection of these different lifeways. Here are some pictures from a couple of weeks ago, really, when Michael Meyer and I were going there together with the Moldovan colleagues into the field, looking at sites which provide evidence for these different intersecting communities. And the last aspect I want to briefly mention again is the language, and how this Neolithic term is really impactful for our understandings of these prehistoric situations, because I would say terms make history. My colleague Herko Nordqvist from Finland and I have recently been looking a bit more deeply into this problem between the Eastern and the Western concept of the Neolithic, and how the lack of knowledge about these two different understandings leads really to wrong interpretations, which are actually based on the language problem rather than on actual archaeological evidence. And I will not go into deep detail here, but this problematic conflict between the Eastern and the Western terminology has led to several approaches to sort of solve the problem. In Finland, for example, and in the Baltic states, the archaeologists are searching for early agriculture to have their pottery Mesolithic to become a real agricultural Neolithic. So it affects their research agendas because of that. Or like in Estonia, connected to the political change, so that Estonia sees itself now more related to the West than to the East. Hence, Ivar Kriska changed the terminology. So what used to be Neolithic Narva culture, so hunter-gatherer with pottery, is now named and relabeled into a Mesolithic culture. Or the third way to deal with that is the postulation of two types of Neolithic. from a Russian point of view, as Vladimir Timofeyev coined, for example, there is an agricultural and a non-agricultural Neolithic, and both types of the Neolithic can be regarded as different phenomena of one and the same process, or others have sort of coined this as well, whereas I think Jaroslav Kuzmin rightfully showed that this is really wrong to see it like this, because we essentialize the terminology and make it into an actual archaeological phenomenon. And interestingly, in this region, which is the center of the attention in this lecture series, in the Northern Pontic region, Dmytro Kirsok has also sort of promoted the view that we can see two types of Neolithic here, as he wrote. We need to distinguish firmly the normal, interesting phrasing, isn't it, external or Hoderian Neolithic, represented in southwest Ukraine by Krish and LBK cultures, so the farming Neolithic, and the riverine cultures like the Bug-Dnestr culture. And actually, this is a nice, I hope it's a nice transition to the next talk in the AVA series, because this discussion will be continued by the talk by Dmytro Kirsok, why is the Bug-Dnestr culture a poor heuristic? So I really look forward to this talk in the next session of this series. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. Right. Okay. Hallo Wolfram.
Das hat sich ein bisschen erweitert.
Okay. Heißt Elke